Hello, today's discussion is going to be reviewing the Survival Sundays discussion number 7. It's part 2. It's over canning. Canning is one of those long-term food storage methods that you can do yourself. It's super simple, and even if you don't have a garden, if you go to a local farmer's market, you can get some really great produce and vegetables and all kinds of fruits and whatnots there at really great prices. So if for whatever reason you're not growing your own food, you can check out the farmer's market, or you can go to your local supermarket. Either one is fine. So today we're going to be looking at canning. Canning your own food is relatively a simple process, but there are important steps you have to follow so it's done properly. If not, there's a risk of foodborne illnesses, and one being botulism. That's a big one in the canning world. There are a few different ways that you can can foods, but for this article we're just going to look at the two most common, which is water bath canning and pressure canning. Water bath canning is very simple. It's a method that you have to use for only foods high in acidity. A water bath canner is basically like a large stock pot. It has a rack inside of it that your jars sit on. And the temperature for water bath canning is 212 degrees Fahrenheit. You can either purchase a dedicated water bath canner at your local store. You can check online. Or if you just have a large enough stock pot, that works well too. But you will need a rack to put inside for your jars to sit on. That is an important part of it. And I did provide a list of high acidity foods that you can water bath can. Just remember, just because you can pretty much can everything, there are specific ways each thing has to be canned. So for water bath canning, these are some of the examples you can can. Apples, blackberries, gooseberries, grapes, grapefruit, lemons, oranges, peaches, pears, pickles, pineapples, plums, relish, sauerkraut, cherries. All of those are high in the acidity levels are high, so they work well in the water bath can method. Some recipes you'll notice will require you to add lemon juice, vinegar, or citric acid. None of that, even though it sounds like it might, none of that changes the taste of anything. It just helps to kill the bacteria that could, manifest or survive through the canning process. But with water bath canning, you can use that to make your jams, jellies, sauces, marmalades, marinades, salsas, and probably a lot more. So the items you're going to need to water bath can include canning jars, funnel, headspace tool, jar lifter, and a lid lifter, a timer, and you're going to need clean kitchen towels. Before you begin, make sure your work surface is clean and sterilized. Also, before you begin, you have to make sure that your jars are clean and sterilized. No matter, even if you buy your jars brand new from the store, you do have to bring them home, wash them in hot water with soap, rinse them really well, and you're going to have to sterilize them. There's two different ways you can sterilize. The first one, the most common one, is get your pot of water boiling, and after you've rinsed your jars out, make sure they're warm. You're rinsing in hot water. While they're still warm, put them down in your hot pot of water. Make sure it's already gotten up to the 212 degree temperature. And I would just leave them in there for a few minutes. I would say 3 to 5 minutes. Just to make sure that if any residue is left, on the jars, it's not, going to hurt your processing. Also, one tip I forgot to make in the article is we have really hard water here. So when I have to add a cup of vinegar into the canner with the water I'm boiling. That vinegar it doesn't touch your food whatsoever. It's fine. But that just helps to, break down the particles in the water, and once you finish canning and you're dumping that water out, you'll notice you'll have all these particles at the bottom of your pot. So if you have hard water and you don't use vinegar, when you pull your jars out, your whole jar is going to have a white film. So make sure you put a cup of vinegar at least into your water bath canner or your pressure canner if you have hard water. Make sure that you only put hot liquids into your jars when you're canning. And one tip that I do is, like if I'm making salsa, for instance, I've got it all ready, it's all in the pot, I've already went through and made my salsa. I have it on the stove, I'm keeping it hot, I've sterilized my jars, I've dumped all the excess water out, I put the salsa directly into the hot jars, seal them up real quick, and I put them in the canner. I don't let them set, I don't let them get cool, because if you do that, once you put them in your canner, they're going to explode. I have done that, and I have learned better. So just make sure your area is well clean and organized, as I mentioned. And this is going to help not only to keep your food products safe, but the organization part of it is you're going to create your own routine for your canning. And it's kind of trial and error method. But your process is going to flow much, much quicker if you have everything that you need on hand and it's there. You don't want to get to one certain step and then you're like, darn, where's the funnel or, whatever. So just keep everything together and you'll get the hang of it. If you've never canned, I do recommend purchasing any type of guide to preserving book or any type of canning instructional book. I have the Ball Blue Book Guide to Preserving. It has detailed instructions. And also, one thing that you need to know is that anytime you can anything, whether it's in a water bath canner or a pressure canner, and the process is complete, you'll take your jars out of the canner, you'll set them on your counter. They need to sit there for 24 hours. It's going to take that amount of time normally for all of your jars to seal properly. You'll know they seal because you're going to start hearing popping, kind of like popcorn, very random. But let them sit there because any movement in that stage and they could unseal themselves. Also, when you take your jars to put in your food storage or your cupboard or whatever you're using, when it's all complete and it's all done, take your rings off. Because if for some reason, your product in your jar has gotten bumped against something and unsealed, you're never going to know it until you go to actually open that months later to eat it and it's spoiled. So store all homemade canned stuff without the ring on it. That way it's going to stay sealed, and if for some reason it does lift up, you're going to know right away. So let's move on to pressure canning real quick. Pressure canning is basically the same idea. You'll need all of the same tools. It's just you're processing it at a higher temperature. It's going to be 240 degrees Fahrenheit. A pressure canner is used when food have low acidity levels. So if they have the least amount of acid in them, you're going to need the higher amount of heat to kill, whatever could be in there. There's two types of pressure canners. There's a weighted gauge canner and a dial gauge canner. They both do the same job. It's just kind of your preference. It's up to you. A weighted gauge canner exhausts small amounts of steam through the canning process. So does the dial canner. The weighted canner comes with an adjustable weight. It's just a little round piece. It'll say 5, 10, and 15. And depending on your recipe, you'll just flip over this little dial thing. It's like a little weight thing. Once you see it, it's self-explanatory. But some pressure cookers, some of the newer ones, for some reason, they come with the standard weight of 15 pounds. But if you have a recipe, for instance, that says you have to can something at 10 pounds, but you have a canner that's only a 15-pound one, that's fine. Don't adjust anything. Just leave it be and process it for the same amount of time as you're supposed to. It's not going to hurt the product. It's not going to hurt the jar. So many of the new canners that have the weighted gauges are very affordable. I've seen some online just looking around. On Amazon, you can catch them usually for about $69. If you go to, I think even Walmart I'm pretty sure Walmart has them. And they're about $70, maybe $80, a little more pricey. If you go to a small mom and pop shop, they are going to be more. We do have a hardware store here close to where we live, and real dinky little hardware store, and I think theirs was like $120. So that was a little pricey, but you know, they're out in the boonies, so they can do that. So back to canning. It's important that if you use the dial gauge canner, you do have that dial tested once a year. And how you do this is you can either Google, or if you have a phone book, search for a co-op extension office. It might be under whatever county you live in. For instance, I live in Grady County. So I would just look up Grady County Cooperative Extension Office, or I could Google it, and call up there and see if they do the testing on your dials. Normally they all do. Normally there's also not a price or a cost involved for this. They might have some type of program where you have to volunteer. I can't remember. If you have to volunteer maybe for a couple hours to do something in return, or maybe you can just bring it up. I'm not real sure. Just check with your local office. When you have the dial canner, you do have to stay there and watch your dial, because it requires supervision throughout the entire process to make sure that not only your pressure that it's supposed to be has been achieved, but it has to be maintained throughout that whole process too. Some of the types of foods that must be pressure canned are like beans, any type of meats, corn, peas, carrots, seafood, asparagus, soup, stalks. That's because they're low in acid. So they're going to have to be pressure canned at that higher temperature. One thing I mentioned that some of you might think is pretty obvious is that a pressure canner is not the same thing as a pressure cooker. One of my friends gave me a pressure cooker once. That way I could can with it. And they're not the same things. Bless her heart. But just a lot of people honestly just don't even realize. So pressure canner, not the same as a pressure cooker. I did provide some elevation charts talking about altitudes of where you live. You do have to increase your processing time. If you live in higher elevations, it looks like for every 2,000 to 3,000 feet above sea level, you're going to have to bump up the time 5 minutes. But you can look at these charts here on the website, or feel free to look it up yourself. But just remember that altitude matters. So here's my favorite part. How long does canned goods stay good? Well, shockingly, for a very long time. When I first started canning, I thought that, they were good about a year. So, we went through our stuff really fast, but it didn't last longer than a year. But, I was thinking a year would be good. Well, then I did some research for this article in particular to find out, what was that amount of time. So what I found out was basically as long as the food appears to look and smell good and there's no indication of spoilage, then it's actually safe to eat for years and years afterwards. I provided a link there, and it was really cool though, because it was regarding some studies that were conducted, and one of them was on, for whatever reason, they had 100-year-old foods that were canned. And so the scientists, opened the foods and put them under the microscope and tested to see what bacteria they contained. Surprisingly, they were canned properly, so they didn't contain anything, and they were perfectly safe to eat 100 years later. To me, that's craziness. Yes, the color in your food is going to change after that long. Even after, maybe a year, 2 years, your color is going to change. Your consistency actually might change, maybe become a little mushier. If it starts turning like a funky color or smells horrible or smells rancid, do not eat it, obviously. But when it's, canned properly, it can last a very long time. There was also another part of that article that they had also tested some food that was 47 years old, and it was fine as well. So as long as you do it right, it's going to be fine. So I hope that this kind of gave you, if you're new to canning or you're interested in it, kind of gave you some ideas of what it's about. If you need more detailed information, please comment or email me at the Trailer Park Homesteader. I'd be more than happy to, email you back, give you step-by-step instructions, whatever the case may be, however I can help you. Canning, it's really enjoyable. I didn't think that I was going to like it really because, I'm not old. This sounds horrible, but I thought it was an older person thing. But after I got into homesteading and preparedness, I realized, hey, this is actually really cool. And, you feel rewarded after you get it accomplished. So, anyway, if I can help you, please email me, trailerparkhomesteader.com. Or, I'm sorry, trailerparkhomesteader@yahoo.com. I hope you enjoyed this, listening to me ramble once again. And next week, we're also going to be having a new Survival Sundays topic. And I'll let you know what it is then. Till then, thanks for listening.